Hi, my name is Lisa Meyerhofer. I play principal flute at Opera in the Ozarks. During the year, I'm also assistant principal flute and piccolo with the Omaha Symphony and principal flute of the Des Moines Symphony. Today, I'm going to be showing you some tips for working on your all-state music for this year, and I hope this helps you when you're practicing. Enjoy! So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Fairling Etude in E minor. It's on page 8 in your Selected Studies book. It's marked Largo Lagrimoso, which basically means pretty slow with a sad and mournful quality to it. So it's very emotional, dramatic type of music. As you play through it, think about the eighth note subdivisions so you stay steady, but also think of it in 3 so you don't get too metronomic and you can still be expressive. Make sure you plan your breaths so you can make it through all these phrases and still have that expressive quality. I'm going to show you a couple of the turns and trills and grace notes throughout. You want to make sure they're not too fast because in the context of this piece they're not going to be like really quick, snappy grace notes. They're more melodic. So here's the pickups to measure 3. Here's the trill in measure 9. You might have noticed I left a few fingers down when I played the C sharp. That's something you can try. It gives you more hand stability so you're not moving all of your fingers from the D sharp to the C sharp. Just those fingers. It won't affect the pitch at all. And then here's the trill in measure 15. And let's see, one more. The turn, written in measure 23. For that one, it's going to be very similar to how you played the rhythm in measure 3, even though it's just notated differently. And one more, in measure 29. This you can practice because there's trills and grace notes in succession, back and forth. You can practice with just the grace notes for a little bit, make sure it's all even. And add the trills. You don't have to do a lot of trilling, just make sure it's just enough for a little flutter. Let's see. As you play throughout this, really make sure you're doing as much of the dynamics as you can. There's a lot of pianos and a lot of fortes, so that's where a lot of the drama comes in. And besides the dynamics, vibrato is really going to help with this. So I'm going to show you a little bit of a vibrato exercise that I like to do. I'm trying to do it one-handed here so you can see with my tuner. I like using this tuner. It's called Tunable, if you want to look it up, because you can see the wavelengths and your progress as you go. So you can pick any note you like, and you want to try to start in tune, and then you slowly bend the pitch down and back up. And then you slowly go faster and faster. So it's kind of like how you might practice double tonguing. You start with quarter notes, then eighth notes, then triplets, 16th notes, and then eventually you make it so your vibrato is just part of the sound and you can't really tell if you're doing a rhythm or not. So I'll show a little of that. So this would take a lot longer than I just demonstrated, but that's the idea. If you just do a little bit of that every day, you'll not only get better vibrato, but you'll have better control over your pitch, just in general. And finally, with this etude, think about the phrasing. You want to lead to any important notes or interesting notes. I'll give you some examples of this. Like in measure 8, measure 7 going into measure 8, you're kind of leading towards the E, which resolves to the D sharp. So let me show that. So your biggest note is actually one of the lowest notes, the E at the downbeat of measure 8. And the crescendo and decrescendo kind of shows you that. Another good spot to think about this would be from the pickups to measure 25, that whole section there. it's a long progression of notes. So the crescendo helps you with this, but you can use intensity vibrato to help along the way. You're leading all the way to the B flat in measure 27. And then you pull away from the B flat. So that's the moment of intensity with the most emotion. Probably in the whole etude, I would say, although there's some other spots too. So really enjoy playing around with this and trying to find some of the most interesting spots in the music. So in this video, I'm going to be talking about the Karg-Ellert etude that's in D minor. It's on page 13 of your selected studies book. It's marked un poco mosso ma non brillante. So that basically means it's a little quick, there's some motion, but it's not brilliant. So it's not flashy, it's not really fast. So you want to think it's flowy, graceful, but you're not going to just rip right through it. So it might be tempting at the beginning with the tempo that's suggested to go kind of faster than that because it feels nice, but by the time you get to the middle and the end of the etude, you're going to be a little stuck. So stick with the tempo that they suggested. You want to think really carefully about the clarity of the start of every slur, because you have a lot of patterns that are two notes slurred at a time. So every time you re-articulate, it's got to be very clear. So when you finish a slur, cut it just a tiny bit short so your tongue can be really accurate on the next note. So the beginning here. Exaggerating a little bit, you might not have to do it that much, but you want to work on it that way at least at first to make sure your tongue is active enough for the clarity. I'm going to give some suggestions for ways to practice in the middle of this, where it starts to get a little tricky with jumps and some of the patterns. Let's see, let's look at measures 21 and 22 first, then leading into 23 through 26. Karl likes to write brackets sometimes over what he intends to be the progression of the notes. So you can think of it that way, but you can also practice it kind of the opposite way, like shifting the brackets over a little bit. Just different ways to think about things that'll help you learn the notes quicker. So follow the groupings and the slurs and the brackets that he uses here in 21. So obviously I'm not doing this in time, but it's a way to think, okay, this is a chunk of music, this is the next chunk of music, and how it progresses from one chord or group of notes to another. So you could flip this around in 23. That's another way to think of it. It's not what he necessarily intended, but it's a good way to practice it too. And then when you move on to something like measure 27 and 28, practice without using all those high E's, just so you know what the changing notes are. And then slowly add in the E's. The high E's are just extra glitter on top, so it's more important to make sure the bottom notes are really solid, and then you just pop up to the high notes. Throughout this etude, really focus on exaggerating the dynamics, so you kind of get that graceful, flowy quality with a little bit of movement and emotion mixed in there. So it's kind of a moody etude, the personality of it. Another term for you to make sure you know is in the fourth line there, amabile means lovely. So you get some of this intense character and the dynamics pop out, and then sometimes you have something a little more peaceful and it's like a total character change. And one more thing to think about, really plan ahead for all of your breaths. It might seem silly to breathe at the end of the fourth measure, you might not need it, but if you look ahead, if you can breathe at the end of the fourth measure, then you have enough air to get yourself to the end of measure 12. And that makes sense musically. So think about things like that as you plan your breaths. In this video, I'm going to be talking about the Karg Elert etude, which is in A major on page 25 in your selected studies book. Now, the recommended tempo for you here is pretty good. It might seem a little slow at first, but once you get about halfway through, you're going to want it more at that tempo. The tempo marking that Karg Elert wrote, leggero e veloce, means light and fast. So you want it quick and lively, but delicate. So if you have trouble just playing really soft, think about it as being delicate, not just soft, and that'll kind of help with the dynamics. I'm going to suggest some places where you can take quick catch breaths to help you get through some of these trickier spots. There's a bunch of things I would recommend. So measure 8 right after the first note, take a quick breath there. Measure 14 after the second note. Let's see, measure 22 and 23 right after the first note of each of those measures. Measure 25 either in one or both of the breaths, and that'll help you get a pretty long distance there. And then if you have to take a breath around measure 28, I would suggest right before the D sharp, because the D sharp and the B sharp lead into the next measure, and you don't want to interrupt that. Throughout this whole etude, there's a lot of awkward groupings with some of the notes, especially measure 27 and 28. Those are probably the trickiest technically and with the articulation. So think about how the melody groups itself as you go along. So take it really slow and think about the progression of the pitches. I'll start a measure before, I think. So I think I kind of leaned into where each new mini group of phrasing was. I'll do that one more time. I'll start right on the measure 27. So there's 3 little subgroups that can help you learn the notes a little bit better before you go straight through those 2 measures. Make sure all the leaps throughout this whole etude are really smooth. You can practice other exercises to help you with this, just kind of as a warm-up every day. Practice octaves, practice scales in thirds, fifths, sixths, sevenths, bigger groupings like that. Some of the slur patterns are a little tricky in this, especially as you get towards the end of the page, because they keep switching where the positions of the slurs are and how many notes are slurred at a time. It can be a little tricky until you nail it down. So I would recommend practicing slow, of course, but exaggerate the tonguing just for practice and add accents just for practice until you get all the placement correct. So for instance, this would be measure 17. Things like that. And then the following measure switches. It's all these cross rhythms that kind of go over the beats. Another example would be 23 and 24. And then the more comfortable you get with them, you can just play it like everything else. The last thing I'll recommend to you is the very end, to make that last note really convincingly pianissimo, which is hard to do when you have to go up to the highest note in the etude right at the end, pianissimo. For notes up that high, I believe it's up past the high F and higher. You can try this. You can use your low C sharp key instead of your normal pinky key, and it'll help the note come out easier, and you can do it really delicately. This isn't something you can do when you play loud because it makes the note really sharp, but it's useful when you're playing soft because it's sharper, so you don't have to worry about the note sagging. So it's a little tricky here because you have to slide over right away from that E right before the note, but you can do it if you want to give it a shot. I'll do the last 2 measures here. So you'd have to work to get the little blip out so it's not audible that you're switching your pinky over. So it might take a little time. But if you do a true staccato, like it's marked on the E, then it's easier. You can get right over in time. And it's a really useful trick. You can use it a lot of times. Anytime you have a high sustained note and you're really careful with how soft it is, you can use that pinky key instead. I hope you found some or all of these thoughts to be helpful as you're working on your music. Best of luck, have fun, and thanks for watching.